Hey guys, welcome back to the Friday Vlog, where we discuss activity that goes on here with the BuzWeaver channel. That includes things like current events, headlines that are in the news, pop culture, social media, technology, and items of interest that come up during the week that allow us to have a little bit of a dialogue. Alright guys, so in channel news today, this video is going to be shot in 1080p 30 frames. So I'm going to kind of go back to the 30 frame standard. This is typically used by television mostly for news media and television shows. And of course, if you want to do more cinematic stuff, of course, you would go with 24 frames. And then most of the things that I do, particularly when it comes to gaming or action activities that I'm filming, I usually use 60p. But if you guys, for any reason, want to know or learn about frame rates and so forth, I'll put a little link below this video if you're kind of curious about setting up these types of productions. The biggest story this week, besides the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, was that of the trial that was taking place in the death of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky. The thing about this story, and I want to say this up front, that as I go through this, I want everyone to understand that because I'm trying to be concise, to the point, and give you as close of information as we can gather on this, by no means am I trying to diminish the tragedy of what took place or to diminish the fact that this young woman lost her life. What I want to do is try to give you guys as clear and contextual of information as I can, because this was being updated in real time on Wednesday. And so there had been a lot of misinformation, particularly what we're learning now, how much misinformation there actually was. And so what I'm going to do is, I got a stack of information. I've got some articles that I want to go over with you guys. I will read the articles and then I'll kind of fill in some of the gaps of things that were actually being changed as I was compiling the information, as well as following and listening to and watching some of my fellow commentators also covering this, and things were being changed as we were going along, or as they were going along as well. So this first one is going to be from CNN. They actually had the most concise of all of the articles. It was, many of the articles were constantly changing the information. So, officers used a battering ram to break down Taylor's door, triggering a chain of events that would leave the unarmed 26-year-old woman fatally shot in a barrage of seemingly out-of-control police gunfire. That's quite an inflammatory outline there. Unlike the recent controversial killing of George Floyd and Rayshard Brooks, which Rayshard Brooks took place here in Atlanta, there is no police body camera video of what transpired in the moments after officers bashed through Taylor's door. And in an era of widespread demand for greater police accountability, it's a case in which achieving a widely agreed upon sense of justice could prove elusive. Interesting way to frame that sentence. In the absence of videotape evidence, the circumstances surrounding Taylor's slaying have been widely discussed and sometimes distorted, as if that needed to be brought up, on social media and by pundits. We'll get into that momentarily. Among the false claims is that police were conducting a raid at the wrong address, and that an officer injured in the shooting was a victim of friendly fire by fellow cops. Now, this next section is in bold, and it starts off with, "We kept banging." Hours after Shaw signed the warrants, police began the operation, conducting near simultaneous raids at the various locations. Taylor's apartment, according to police, not sure why I lost my voice there, Taylor's apartment, according to police, was considering a less volatile soft target. As such, police commanders decided in advance to have officers knock and announce their presence before entry. That decision was communicated in a pre-operational briefing, according to a source familiar with the details of the operation, who requested anonymity due to the ongoing investigation. Sometime after 12:30 a.m., Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly began pounding on the door. Mattingly began pounding on the door. He later told investigators he believed Taylor was alone and he wanted to give her sufficient time to answer. As officers waited for a response, a neighbor poked his head out to ask what was going on. One of the officers, Brett Hackinson, extended his gun and told the neighbor to get back inside his apartment. Mattingly would later tell investigators. Now, some of what they said here was accurate. For example, obviously a lot of distorted information or misinformation in social media that the police had arrived at her apartment. They did not announce. They burst in. They were in plain clothes. The boyfriend thought they were trying to break in. He shot and fired. So that was what was going around in social media. So obviously we see that things didn't exactly happen the way it was outlined. Now, I agree with CNN completely that this was tragic, without a doubt. And unfortunately, this young woman lost her life because of just some very, just a set of very terrible circumstances. And it's really sad that it happened. Now, I want to move on to some additional information and context here. So I want to see which of these I want to read first. Excuse me, guys. Okay, so let's go ahead and just start here. This is from the New York Post. So, the Louisville police officers involved in Breonna Taylor's shooting death knocked and announced themselves and did not execute a no-knock warrant as previously believed, Kentucky's Attorney General said Wednesday. And well, he said it at a press conference, so now we're going into the next paragraph. At a press conference, AG Daniel Cameron said a neighbor corroborated cops' claim that they knocked on Taylor's apartment door and announced themselves as police in the early hours of March the 13th. So we just read from CNN. The guy came out, wanted to know what was going on. A lot of noise apparently was going on. Evidence showed officers knocked and announced their presence at the apartment, Cameron said. Following the announcement from a grand jury to indict one of the officers, Brett Hackinson, on 3 counts of wanton endangerment in the first degree for firing his weapon into another apartment. Our reaction to the truth in this, our reaction to the truth is in the society we want to be, he said. Okay. Do we really want the truth, or do we want a truth that fits our narrative? Do we want the facts? Are we content to blindly accept our own version of events? We as a community must make this decision. Now, of course, he's essentially saying what I tell you guys, right? And that is that we have the jury of public opinion, and then we actually have the actual evidence and information that would be presented in an actual case with an actual jury, with attorneys and judges and actual individuals who work in law to understand what took place, to take the evidence. But we're in such an instant information society that everyone wants to make a judgment right now, and they want actions and solutions right now. And it just simply doesn't happen that way. It takes time to gather this information. It takes time to process the information. Then it has to go to a trial, and then it has to go, the attorneys plead their case. Evidence is presented, the jury is instructed to follow the law and not necessarily their feelings and so forth, but all these things kind of take place. But suffice it to say, what he's saying is correct. As someone who worked in law, I experienced being in the courtrooms when these types of cases were taking place. It is much different when you're actually hearing the actual information, which can be painful to hear and extraordinarily detailed because nothing is left out, versus what the people are saying, but more specifically, guys, what the media is saying, because they don't always know the information either, because they're not allowed into the courtrooms sometimes. And even if they were allowed in there, they don't always get it right. So now this was, again, with the media updating things in real time constantly. Sorry, I had to check the light there. So on March the 12th, a Jefferson County Circuit Court judge approved 5 search warrants for locations linked to Taylor's ex-boyfriend, a convicted felon suspected of supplying a drug house. One of those locations belonged to Taylor. Hours later, in the early mornings of March the 13th, officers arrived at Taylor's apartment and began pounding on the door, an officer later told investigators. Taylor was in bed with her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker III, who said he heard banging on the door just after midnight. Concerned there might be trouble, he grabbed his gun with his attorney, which his attorney said he legally owned. Again, the media always putting in these little caveats. They yelled to ask who was at the door but got no response, he said afterwards. This is what Walker was saying. The officers used a battering ram to break the door, and Walker then fired one shot at who he believed were intruders. Mattingly, he was actually shot in the leg, and although the movies and TV show, shoot him in the leg, you can hit the femoral artery. You hit the femoral artery, people bleed out and they die. People do die from being shot in the leg. So because other officers were there, perhaps, they were able to treat him immediately when he was shot, because there could have been 2 people dead that evening. So Mattingly, who first went through the door, was shot in the leg. So this is kind of to clear up the friendly fire thing, that he was shot by other officers. He and 2 other officers, Hackinson and Cosgrove, then returned fire throughout the home. Walker was unarmed, but Taylor was shot multiple times and died in the shooting, which is unfortunate and sad. So, as you can see here, we have a number of different scenarios that happened or that were accounted for. But yesterday, starting it off with misinformation, is that one of the officers were indicted. And so people thought that they were indicted for her death. And none of them were indicted for her death. And once they realized that, of course, they were very upset, very understandably. So the one officer was indicted because he was firing into the apartment kind of blindly. And so he was charged, I believe it was with like reckless conduct or reckless endangerment. So that was really the charge that they received. And here's the thing. It's possible that we may see something very similar in the George Floyd case and even in the Rayshard Brooks case, because like I said, guys, there is the jury of public opinion where people can make decisions and make opinions and espouse their thoughts on it versus what actually happens in a courtroom. Now, this is a very tragic story, and again, it's sad that this happened. I want to try to bring you guys as concise of an outline as I could, and this is what we were able to gather, at least from the information that we had. I will put links below this video if you guys want to look into it further and read it detail by detail. All right, guys, so that's going to wrap it up for this Friday vlog. I want to thank all of you guys for your continued support of the channel and all of you who commented last week. Yes, they did change some of the notifications for us from YouTube. I was going to go into more detail, but running out of battery. I want to thank all of you guys, of course, for your support. If you are following on DTube, BitChute, and on Parlay, I would ask you guys to give me a follow there as well. And of course, appearing right there on the screen right now, that would be the channel icon to click on and subscribe, along with notifications. That way you guys will know when there's content here on the channel, as well as the Friday vlog. And I will see you guys right there behind the dying battery camera next week.